You know, you probably think of your own brain as like the ultimate supercomputer.
Right. Yeah, we love that metaphor.
We really do. We imagine billions of neurons firing in this perfect, flawless sequence, processing, just unfathomable amounts of data with cold, absolute precision.
Exactly, like a sterile machine.
Yeah, but well, if you actually observe this biological supercomputer operating in the real world, the metaphor falls apart pretty quickly.
Oh, completely.
Because if it's so advanced, why does it invent fake memories?
hmm
Or, why does it completely fail at basic elementary math if a question is just framed slightly differently?
Yeah, it turns out your mind isn't a sterile machine at all. The cognitive landscape is incredibly messy.
It's much more like a brilliant but highly eccentric artist trying to organize a very chaotic universe.
That's a great way to put it. We are looking at a system that possesses staggering processing power, yet remains entirely bound by its own quirky evolutionary shortcuts. We want to believe the apparatus running our lives is fundamentally rational, but the reality is far more complex and, frankly, much more interesting.
And that is our mission for you today on this deep dive. We are pulling from a comprehensive academic text on language and thought to give you basically a shortcut to understanding the hidden machinery of your own mind.
We've got a lot of fascinating ground to cover.
We really do. We're going to explore how you acquire language, how you organize the sheer chaos of reality into manageable concepts, the deeply flawed ways your brain makes decisions, and ultimately whether the specific language you speak secretly controls the way you think.
It's a big agenda.
Okay, let's unpack this. To understand how we think, it makes sense that we first have to deconstruct the primary vehicle of our thoughts, which is language.
Right, the foundation.
Yeah, how do we build complex meaning out of literally thin air?
Well, it starts at the absolute base level with speech sounds, which are known as phonemes.
Phone is okay.
Yeah, phone is the smallest unit of sound, like the B sound in boy or the K sound in cat.
Right.
And from there, the system builds upward. Phonemes combine into morphemes, which are, the smallest units of meaning, like a whole word or maybe a prefix.
And then we string those together.
Exactly. Those morphemes string together using syntax, which is the set of grammatical rules, to form complete sentences. But the truly fascinating part happens at that foundational layer.
The phones.
Yeah. The way your brain processes phonemes is not a passive recording. It is an active, really aggressive filter.
Wait, if it's a filter, how does a baby actually learn to process those sounds? Because, when you watch a newborn, it feels like they are just a sponge absorbing absolutely everything in their environment.
Well, they do start out that way. Infants are actually born with a remarkable superpower. They possess the ability to hear and distinguish every single phone in every human language on Earth.
Oh, wow. Every single one.
Every single one.
Yeah.
But there is a catch. By their first birthday, they lose the ability to distinguish sounds that aren't actively used in their native tongue.
Wait, hold on. You're saying my brain actively deleted the ability to hear a sound?
It really did, yeah.
How is becoming slightly deaf an evolutionary advantage?
The biological mechanism at play here is neural pruning. The brain is an incredibly energy-hungry organ.
Right. It takes a lot of calories to run.
Exactly. And maintaining the neural pathways to distinguish, say, Hindi consonants when you only ever hear English, it's just a massive waste of resources.
Well, it just shuts those pathways down.
It discards what it deems useless to achieve cognitive efficiency. For example, a baby in a Japanese-speaking household will eventually lose the ability to distinguish between the English R and L sounds because Japanese just doesn't differentiate them. And conversely, an English-speaking baby will become entirely deaf to the subtle differences between the two different P sounds used in Hindi.
It's like being handed a giant box of international Lego blocks as a baby.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, you've got every conceivable shape and color. But if your family only ever builds with the red and blue blocks, your brain just stops processing the green and yellow ones. It just throws them away to make more room on the table.
That is a perfect analogy. And that neural efficiency relies heavily on top-down processing, which means we use context and our own expectations to build meaning rather than just decoding words one by one.
Which saves us a lot of time, I imagine.
A ton of time. The source text highlights a brilliant study illustrating this. Participants were asked to read a really vague paragraph about arranging items into groups, going to different facilities, and making sure not to overdo it.
Sounds incredibly confusing.
It was. Without context, the participants found it completely baffling. But the moment the researchers told them the topic was washing clothes, the participants' brains activated a specific cognitive schema.
Oh, like a mental blueprint.
Yes. Instantly, every confusing sentence clicked into place. The physical architecture of the brain is wired to work this exact way.
And this modular architecture becomes incredibly apparent when things break down, right?
Very apparent, yeah. We see the physical boundaries of language when we look at localized brain damage.
Like in specific lobes of the brain.
Right. So in the frontal lobe, you have Broca's area, which handles the physical production of language. If a patient suffers damage there, what we call Broca's aphasia, they completely understand everything you say to them.
So their comprehension is totally fine.
Totally fine. But their own speech becomes agonizingly halting. The brain strips away all the syntax and grammar, leaving them struggling to just push out raw nouns and verbs.
Wow. So the thought is intact, but the outbound translation software is basically broken.
Correct. Now, contrast that with Wernicke's area, which is located in the temporal lobe, and that handles comprehension.
So the opposite problem.
Exactly. A patient with Wernicke's aphasia experiences the exact reverse. Their outward speech flows perfectly. The syntax, the rhythm, the grammar, it all sounds completely fluent.
But the words don't make sense.
The content is absolute nonsense. They will enthusiastically string together unrelated words or even invent totally new ones.
Really? Like what?
Like they might talk animatedly about how they, quote, can't mention the terrapoi, completely unaware that the listener has no idea what they mean.
That is wild.
Yeah, the outward mechanics are fine, but the internal meaning maker is severely damaged.
Okay, so if our brains are this modular and so ruthlessly efficient at pruning sounds and building schemas, how does a literal toddler master the actual rules of grammar so fast?
It's a great question.
Because, I mean, our most advanced supercomputers and AIs still struggle with conversational nuance, but a 3-year-old just naturally figures it out.
Yeah, and this is actually one of the most contentious debates in psychology.
Really?
Historically, behaviorists believed children learned entirely through social repetition and reward. You know, you say cookie, you get a cookie.
Makes sense on a basic level.
Sure, but that totally fails to explain how a child can formulate a sentence they have never heard before.
Oh, right, because you can't mimic something you've never heard.
Exactly. And that observation led the linguist Noam Chomsky to propose something radical: the language acquisition device. He argued that humans are actually born pre-wired with a universal grammar template.
So they aren't just parroting their parents. They are, like, acting like tiny scientists testing out grammatical hypotheses.
That is the modern understanding, yes. We see this vividly in a phenomenon called overregularization.
Overregularization.
Yeah, it's when a young child will suddenly start saying things like, I break the cup, or I go home.
Oh, I've heard kids do that all the time.
Right, and they have never heard an adult say braked, so they cannot possibly be imitating.
Ah, I see.
Instead, their brain has independently recognized the underlying rule that adding ed to a word makes it past tense, and they're universally applying that rule to see what happens.
Wow. But that internal scientific laboratory doesn't stay open forever, does it?
No, it actually has a strict biological timer. There is a critical period for language acquisition. The text details the tragic case of Jeannie, a child who suffered extreme isolation and abuse until she was 11.
I remember reading about her. It's heartbreaking.
It really is. And despite years of intensive therapy after her rescue, she could memorize vocabulary words, but she never mastered syntax. Her window had closed.
Because she missed that critical period.
Exactly. And we see a similar pattern in deaf individuals who aren't exposed to American Sign Language until after age 12. Even decades later, their syntactic fluency never reaches the level of someone who learned ASL in early childhood.
Okay, so what happens when we look outside our own species? We've all seen the documentaries where researchers try to teach apes sign language. Does that prove syntax isn't just a human trait?
It provides a fascinating contrast, for sure. The text examines Kanzi, a bonobo who learned to communicate using a keyboard of symbols.
Did Kanzi learn syntax?
He did, actually. Kanzi could genuinely understand word order. He understood the difference between the symbol sequence for bite mulika, meaning he was going to bite his sister,
Oh, yikes.
and mulika bite, meaning she bit him. So he grasped basic syntax.
But there's a but coming, I can tell.
Yes. The crucial difference is the mechanism of learning. It took Kanzi years of intensive, explicit training to grasp a concept that a human toddler absorbs passively in a matter of months.
Wow, so it's the speed and the instinct that's different.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is how modern evolutionary research interprets that gap. For a long time, the assumption was that the human brain evolved a specific, standalone language organ.
Like a dedicated language center.
Right. But newer models suggest the opposite, that language evolved to fit the existing constraints of the human brain.
How does that work?
Well, the theory is that syntax piggybacked on the neural architecture we already used for manual tool
Wait,
use.
tool use? Like building things?
Yes, the sequencing of physical actions. And it also piggybacked on our mirror neurons, which allow us to imitate the social actions of others. So in this view, language is an incredibly complex cultural tool that adapted to our specific biological hardware.
Okay, I hear that, but I have to push back a little here.
Go for it.
If language is just a byproduct of banging rocks together and being social, why is the developmental sequence so universally rigid?
What do you mean?
Well, every single human culture on the planet, regardless of how they parent or what their society looks like, sees children go from one-word to two-word telegraphic speech to complex syntax in the exact same order.
It's true.
That feels much more like a hardwired biological blueprint than a cultural invention.
And it is a profound challenge to the purely cultural model. The current consensus actually synthesizes both of those ideas. We absolutely have heavy innate biological constraints, that blueprint you mentioned.
Okay.
But the actual wiring requires the catalyst of social interaction to activate. A child needs the biological hardware, but they also require the cultural software to boot the system up.
Right, hardware and software. Let's talk about that software, actually. Language gives us the words, but how do those words actually map to the physical world?
It's a huge task.
I mean, the universe is infinitely complex. If we had to invent a unique name for every single unique leaf or grain of sand, our brains would literally overload and crash. How do we organize reality so we can actually function?
We use concepts and categorization to create what psychologists call cognitive economy.
Cognitive economy.
Yeah, by grouping similar things together, your brain doesn't have to expend energy analyzing every new object from scratch. It categorizes the world using two primary mechanisms, cores and prototypes.
Okay, so if I try to picture a bird,
Yeah.
and I immediately see a robin in my head, not a penguin, is that the core or the prototype?
That is the prototype. A prototype is the best, most representative example of a concept.
Because it's what I see most often.
Well, because a robin flies, it chirps, it builds nests and prees. It represents the statistical average of what a bird is.
And a penguin?
A penguin doesn't fly or chirp, making it a terrible prototype even though it strictly belongs to the category. A core, on the other hand, is the strict defining rule of a concept.
Give me an example of a core.
Take the concept of a grandmother. The core rule is simply the female parent of a parent. It is a rigid, logical definition.
But if I tell you to imagine a grandmother, nobody pictures a 35-year-old woman, even if she technically fits the core rule.
Precisely. Because our daily lives rely much more heavily on fuzzy concepts driven by prototypes rather than strict core rules. You picture a woman in her 60s, perhaps with gray hair, because that matches the prototype.
It's basically like making a music playlist.
Oh, how so?
Well, you intuitively know if a song belongs on your rock playlist. It has a certain guitar distortion, a specific driving energy. That's the prototype.
Right.
You might not be able to sit down and articulate the exact music theory or the core tempo rules of the rock genre, but your brain instantly categorizes the song based on its similarity to the best examples you already know.
That is spot on. And we tend to assume those prototypes are entirely constructed by our culture and our language, but the research shows they are actually deeply tied to human biology.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The source material brings up the Dani people of New Guinea.
Yes, a classic study.
Their language is incredibly unique because it only has two color words, one roughly translating to black or dark, and one for white or light. They literally do not have a word for the color red.
Not a single word for it.
Yet researchers showed them various colored chips, including a highly prototypical, vivid fire engine red, alongside several weird sort of off shades of red. And later, they asked them to pick out the colors they had seen.
Right, and if language completely controlled thought, the Dani people shouldn't be able to distinguish or remember those colors any better than random shades.
Exactly. But the Dani people remember the typical focal red color infinitely better than the off shades. Even without the vocabulary to describe it, their brains instinctively organize the visual spectrum around the exact same universal prototype as an English speaker.
Which demonstrates that our biology dictates certain perceptions. A specific wavelength of red is simply more physically salient to the human retina. Language doesn't override the hardware.
So we have these highly efficient concepts filed away in our mental zip files, and we string them together to reason, to make decisions, and to argue.
We do.
And we pride ourselves on being logical creatures. But when you look at deductive and inductive reasoning, the supercomputer starts to look pretty glitchy.
Oh, we are definitely not the intuitive logicians we like to think we are. We rely heavily on mental shortcuts called heuristics, which often lead us astray. Let's test this, actually, with the famous Watson selection task.
Okay, lay it on me.
Imagine 4 cards on a table. You can see the faces: E, K, 4, and 7.
Got it. EK4, 7.
You are given a strict rule. If a card has a vowel on one side, it must have an even number on the other.
Huh.
Your job is to pick the absolute minimum number of cards to turn over to prove if the rule is true or false. Which ones do you turn?
Well, the instinct is to turn over the E to make sure there's an even number on the back.
Okay.
And then turn over the 4 to make sure there's a vowel.
That is exactly what the vast majority of people choose, and it is logically incorrect.
Really?
Well, you have to turn over the E, yes. But turning over the 4 tells you nothing because the rule didn't state that every even number must have a vowel.
Oh, right.
You actually need to turn over the 7. If there is a vowel on the back of the 7, the rule is broken. Less than 10% of people get this right. The human brain fails miserably at abstract deductive logic.
But the researchers did something brilliant here. They changed the framing.
They did.
They kept the exact same logical structure, but they made it a social rule. So the cards are now sitting in a bar. They read, drinking beer, drinking Coke, 22 years old, and 16 years old.
And the rule changes.
Right, the rule is now, if a person is drinking beer, they must be over 19.
And when framed that way, the failure rate drops to almost 0. Everyone instantly knows you have to check the person drinking the beer, and you have to check the ID of the 16-year-old.
It's so obvious when it's framed like that.
The abstract math stalls the brain, but the pragmatic social rule is processed effortlessly.
This proves to me that our brains are not built for abstract calculus. I mean, they're survival engines.
Definitely.
We evolved in tribes, where survival depended on sharing resources. Our brains are highly tuned to detect cheaters in a social contract. Finding out who is drinking beer underage, that triggers our cheater detection software.
Exactly.
The brain lights up, but checking vowels and numbers, there is no evolutionary advantage to that, so the system just guesses.
That evolutionary interpretation explains a lot of our cognitive blind spots. And our inductive reasoning, how we estimate probabilities, is just as deeply flawed.
Oh, yeah.
We use the similarity heuristic, which leads directly to the conjunction fallacy.
The Linda problem, right?
Exactly. Consider the classic Linda problem. Participants are given a description of Linda. She is 31, outspoken, brilliant, and deeply concerned with issues of discrimination and social justice.
Okay, very specific prototype.
Right. Then participants are asked to rate what is statistically more probable. Option 1, Linda is a bank teller. Or option 2, Linda is a bank teller, and active in the feminist movement.
I mean, option 2 sounds exactly like the description. It fits the prototype perfectly.
It fits the narrative perfectly, which is why almost everyone chooses option 2. But mathematically, it is an absolute impossibility.
Because it's a conjunction of two things.
Right. The probability of 2 events occurring together, being a bank teller and a feminist, can never be higher than the probability of just one of those events occurring.
Because every feminist bank teller is, by definition, a bank teller.
Exactly. The single condition will always be statistically more probable. But our brains ignore the raw math in favor of a compelling story.
And it gets even more chaotic when risk and emotion are introduced.
Oh, absolutely.
The text explains the framing effect. If a doctor tells a patient a surgery has a 70% survival rate, the patient is eager to proceed. But if the doctor says the exact same surgery has a 30% mortality rate, the patient refuses.
The mathematical reality is identical in both scenarios.
Completely identical.
Yeah.
But we are intensely risk-averse when evaluating gains, and we will take massive, reckless gambles to avoid locking in a perceived loss.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, to the actual anatomy of the brain, we find the orbitofrontal cortex, which is situated just behind the eyes.
Okay, what does that part do?
This region doesn't handle cold calculus. It translates thoughts into somatic markers, basically physical, emotional gut reactions.
Like getting a bad feeling about something.
Yes. When a normal person considers a bad gamble, this region sends a literal stress signal to the body. Your palms sweat, your heart rate spikes. You feel the danger before you consciously process the math.
Wow.
And patients with damage to this area maintain their high IQs, but they completely lose that physical warning system.
So what happens to them?
In gambling tasks, they will repeatedly make catastrophic high-risk choices because their brain no longer generates the emotional fear required for rational decision-making. Pure logic without emotion, actually destroys our ability to function.
Okay, so our conscious reasoning is easily tricked by framing. We ignore statistics for a good story, and we rely on sweaty palms to make decisions.
Pretty much.
Knowing all of that, how do we ever successfully solve complex problems?
Well, we have to find ways to overcome our own mental sets. A major barrier to problem solving is something called functional fixedness.
Functional fixedness. Let's talk about the candle problem.
Yes, the classic candle problem. You are led into a room and given a candle, a box of thumbtacks, and a book of matches.
Okay.
You are told to attach the candle to the wall so the wax doesn't drip on the table below. Most people fail this. They try to melt the wax to stick the candle to the wall, or they try to tack the candle directly.
Which doesn't work.
No. And they fail because they look at the box and see it only as a container for the tacks. They are functionally fixed on its primary, prototypical use.
Right, and to solve it, you have to break the prototype. You empty the tacks out, tack the cardboard box itself to the wall, and basically use it as a shelf for the candle.
Exactly. The ability to see past the superficial features of an object or a problem is exactly what separates novices from experts. Well, whether it's a chess grandmaster or a physics professor, expertise is not just about memorizing more facts. Experts fundamentally represent problems differently.
Okay.
A novice looks at a physics problem and sees the surface features. Oh, this problem has a pulley and a rope. An expert looks at the exact same problem and sees the deep structural principles. This is a conservation of energy problem.
So they see the underlying mechanics.
Yes, that deep structure allows their problem solving to become automatic.
But what if you aren't an expert? The text mentions a study by a researcher named Dijksterhuis about the power of the unconscious mind that completely flips how we should approach decisions.
The Dijksterhuis study is remarkable. He had participants try to choose the best car to buy based on a set of data.
Simple enough?
Well, when the choice was simple, they only had to consider 4 attributes per car. Conscious, deliberate thinking produced the best results.
Makes sense.
But when the choice became highly complex, involving 12 different attributes per car, like mileage, transmission, cup holders, and legroom, the conscious thinkers performed terribly.
Really? Why?
The people who made the best, most optimal choices were actually the ones who read the data, were intentionally distracted with unrelated word puzzles for several minutes, and were then forced to make an immediate choice.
Wait, so what does this all mean? If I'm buying a house or choosing a career path, massive, complex life choices with dozens of variables, I should just read the prospectus and then go play a video game.
That is exactly what the data suggests.
That's crazy.
I know, but the mechanism here relates to working memory, which is the mental workspace of our conscious thought. Working memory has a very strict capacity limit. It basically creates a cognitive bottleneck.
So we just can't hold all that info at once.
If you try to consciously juggle 12 variables, you drop most of them. But unconscious thought doesn't suffer from that bottleneck. It operates in parallel. It can actively weigh and balance a multitude of variables in the background. So for simple things, sure, make a pros and cons list. But for highly complex decisions, absorb the information and then actively distract your conscious mind. Let your unconscious process the data and then trust the intuition that surfaces.
That is incredibly counterintuitive, but beautifully liberating. Which brings us to the grand finale here. We've traced the path from sounds to concepts to logic to problem solving.
A long journey.
And it all leads to the ultimate question of the Horphian hypothesis, or linguistic relativity, basically. Does the specific language you speak dictate the limits of what you can think?
It's a huge question. The extreme version of linguistic determinism, the idea that language acts as a prison for thought, is demonstrably false.
Like we saw with the Dani people and the colors.
Yes, and the Pirahan tribe in the Amazon provides another clear counterexample. Their language lacks exact number words entirely. They operate with concepts roughly translating to a few or many.
But they can still do math.
Exactly. When researchers tested them, they could still perform computations and accurately match large quantities of objects. The lack of vocabulary did not delete the underlying cognitive capacity for quantity.
But the text does clarify that language shapes cognition in some very real, subtle ways, right?
It definitely does.
Look at the Celtal Mayan people. Their language does not use relative directions like left or right. They use absolute cardinal coordinates, north, south, east, west, even for the smallest spatial relations.
Yes, this is fascinating.
So they won't say the cup is on your right, they will say pass the cup to the north.
And that linguistic requirement, fundamentally alters how they navigate and encode their memories.
Really? How?
Well, if you ask a subtle speaker to memorize the layout of objects on a table, they encode that memory using absolute coordinates. Because their language requires them to constantly unconsciously track their cardinal orientation, their spatial memory operates profoundly differently from an English speaker's.
Yeah, makes total sense.
So language is an optional, highly flexible system for encoding our experiences.
It's a lens. You can take the lens off, but while you were wearing it, it absolutely colors the world you see.
It does. But there is one final piece of research in the text that complicates everything we've discussed about language and the human brain.
Oh.
It involves a border collie named Rico.
A dog.
A dog. Rico learned over 200 distinct words.
Impressive.
But the astonishing part wasn't the vocabulary size, it was the mechanism. Researchers proved that Rico learned using the exact same fast mapping inference process that human toddlers use.
Wait, how did they prove that?
Well, if you put a group of familiar toys in a room, add one completely novel toy, and ask Rico to fetch the wug, a word he has never heard before, he uses deductive logic.
He figures out what the wug is by process of elimination.
Exactly. He infers that because he knows the names of all the other toys, the new word must refer to the new object. He learns the concept in a single exposure.
That's incredible. He's running the same cognitive software as a human child.
This raises an important question. We established earlier that human language likely evolved to fit the human brain, piggybacking on physical tool use and intense face-to-face social interaction.
Right.
But if a non-human animal can tap into those exact mechanics of language acquisition, it proves how incredibly adaptable these cognitive processes are.
Wow.
So what happens to human thought now? Today, our primary tools are no longer physical objects, they are screens.
Yeah.
Our social interactions are increasingly mediated by algorithms and conversational AIs. As we interact more intimately with non-human digital entities, will our biological hardware adapt again?
Oh, man.
Will a new kind of digital language emerge that fundamentally rewires human problem solving and cognition for the next generation?
Wow. That is a terrifying and thrilling thought to end on. We think we are training the AIs, but they are absolutely training us right back.
It's a two-way street.
It really makes you realize that the human brain isn't a rigid, sterile supercomputer at all. It's something much more organic, constantly rewiring itself to survive whatever environment or whatever language we throw at it.
Well said.
Definitely something to chew on the next time you find yourself trying to use pure logic to win an argument. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.